This is Robert. In the year 2006, Robert was 56 years old and lived with his wife Joy, daughter Alicia, and son Alex in Fredericton, New Brunswick. And although Robert's 50th birthday had come and gone, he still felt and looked young and would even, on occasion, be mistaken for someone much younger than him. However, this flattering mistake had not been made in some time, and he was beginning to feel a little older than he'd like to admit. That feeling became considerably more intense one day as Robert was looking through his old records, most of which he'd sold off years earlier at a yard sale, when Alex, 13 in August, asked him what exactly a record was. Now, this unbelievable display of ignorance made Robert realize that if he did not intervene soon, his son would grow up knowing nothing about his interests, stories, or way of life. So he dug out his old turntable and picked out the perfect record, his favorite record, and gave Alex a lesson in rock and roll history. He told him some tales from his freewheeling youth, like the time he and Tom hitchhiked to Moncton to go and see Supertramp, only to get there and find it completely sold out. He hadn't done anything that exciting in ages. A few days later, when he came home from work, to hear music coming from the basement and saw Alex downstairs listening to Supertramp as he read comic books, Robert had a vision of their basement, which had previously been used to store relics of his youth, being transformed into a games room, like the one Ned Flanders had in his basement in The Simpsons. So he hopped on to Gigi, and without even consulting the wife, bought the first ping-pong table under $100 that he saw. And from that day on, when Robert would come home from work, he would find Alex in the basement playing ping-pong and listening to his old records, and it was deeply satisfying to know his lessons in rock and roll history were working and that one day he would have a worthy heir. That fall, Alex, for the very first time after years of trying, got onto a competitive hockey team, and Robert began taking him on weekend trips around the province to tournaments. The only problem with these weekends was that they were full of team activities and loudly supportive parents, two things Robert deeply hated. The other parents wanted something different than he did from those weekends on the road. They wanted to party and to fool around with each other, mostly at night as he tried to sleep, while he just wanted to read. His goal was to make it through a book a weekend, focusing mainly on those classics he could find for $1 at French's while shopping for used clothes. However, in addition to having to contend with the other parents, Robert also had to deal with Alex, who he had instructed to do homework in between games, but was completely incapable of sitting still, and was driving him crazy. Desperate for any solution to this dire situation, Robert decided to take advantage of Alex's newfound interest in records, so he could at least get out of the hotel. Aside from the occasional Beatles record, which was sold as a collectible at a ridiculous price, most records back then cost less than $3, and you could spend hours sifting through heaps of vinyl for the best buy. It also gave Robert opportunities to continue teaching Alex about himself. However, because of their worthlessness, before you could go record hunting, you first had to go record store hunting. And these expeditions brought Robert to places he didn't even realize still existed, and that he was sure the wife wouldn't approve of him taking Alex to. Anyways, it didn't take them very long to visit every single record store in the province. In Fredericton, there was Backstreet Records on Queen Street and Digital World on Dundonald. In Moncton, you had Spin It Records on Main and Livewire on Mountain Road. In St. John, both record stores Backstreet, the original, and Loyalist City were on Germain. The Fredericton Backstreet Records was the closest record store to Robert's house and Alex's favorite one. It carried most people's fourth best albums, The River, Slow Train Coming, Comes a Time, etc. Near Robert's in-laws was Digital World, a pawn shop with a small selection of records that were mostly junk, but was occasionally graced with a hidden gem. In Moncton, Spin It was the sort of store that specialized in those rare pressings of the Beatles, usually in mono, or bootleg live albums, which cost $80. While Livewire Music Emporium mainly sold records by bands like Triumph, Trooper, Whitesnake, and April Wine, which had sold well 20 years earlier, but no one had really listened to since. St. John's Backstreet Records had recently been named one of Canada's top 5 record stores by a CBC listeners poll, even though it always smelt of incense. while just a few doors down, Loyalist City Toys and Collectibles sold equal amounts of kids' comics and men's magazines. It smelt like wet oatmeal. Over the following months, the two hauled home a hefty amount of vinyl. But while Alex was once content buying and listening to the albums Robert recommended, mostly by now unknown bands from the 60s and 70s, he soon began gravitating towards bands like Pink Floyd, Led Zeppelin, and Jimi Hendrix, which were considerably more expensive. A recent trip to spin it had cost Robert $120, and he'd only bought 5 records. That night, while booked in at the Dieppe Super 8, as the rest of Alex's team partied away at the Moncton Ramada, as he lay in bed listening to cars speed by, staring up at the street lights on the ceiling, and completely unable to sleep, Robert had a realization. He realized that his and Alex's record collecting, which had grown from a way to kill time into a full-blown addiction in just a couple of months, had to stop.